Okay, so have you ever been in that situation where you're sitting in a work meeting,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
and you have this thought or idea that you really want to share,
Yeah.
but then like when it comes to actually like speaking up and saying it,
Yeah.
especially in English, it's like suddenly everything just feels so much harder.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like all of a sudden you're trying to push a boulder uphill.
Yeah, like all the pressure just kind of builds up in that moment.
Yeah, and I think it happens whether English is your first language or not,
Yeah, definitely.
Like even for native English speakers, sometimes you freeze up in those moments.
Oh, I totally get that those dynamics in a work meeting can be like intimidating enough on their own.
Right.
And then when you add in, having to communicate in a language that isn't your native language, it's like it adds this extra layer of, well, hesitation.
Yeah, it's totally understandable to feel a little bit, hesitant in those
Yes,
situations.
for sure.
Well, good news, everyone. Today, we are tackling that feeling head on in this deep dive.
Yeah, we're going to get into it.
We're going to get into it.
Awesome.
We found this really great article called How to Speak English Confidently in Work Meetings, Tips and Techniques.
I love that.
It's by Learn English with Joe.
Oh, yeah, they have great stuff.
And we're gonna basically extract all of the best tips and techniques from this article that you can actually start using right
I
away.
think that's so important. It's one thing to read about these things, but it's another to actually have actionable steps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's our mission here today, is to give you those actionable steps so you can walk into your next English-speaking work meeting and feel a little bit more confident and like a lot more prepared.
Yeah, and it's not just about like getting your point across, it's also about feeling good about it. Like
Right.
having that sense of assurance so you can really share your ideas clearly and have an impact.
Yeah. So let's jump right in.
Let's go.
Um, the article starts with this point that seems like pretty obvious, but it's honestly so foundational, and it's preparation. Preparation is key, and that's something that I think a lot of people overlook.
I think so too. It's easy to kind of just show up and wing it.
Right. But if you take just, a few minutes before the meeting to actually prepare it, can make a huge difference in how confident you feel when you're actually in the meeting.
Yeah, I think about it like this. When you when you prepare, you're not just like knowing what to say.
Uh-huh.
You're actually like equipping your brain to handle all of the demands of speaking under pressure,
Wow.
Like when you've practiced beforehand and organized your thoughts, it just reduces the mental load so much.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
And it frees you up to focus on your delivery and engaging with people.
Yeah, and there are a few key steps that the article emphasizes when it comes to preparation. And the first one is review the meeting agenda.
The good old agenda.
The agenda, I mean, it seems obvious, right? Like, of course you're going to look at the agenda.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how many people actually, like, thoroughly review it.
Right, like really dig into it.
Yeah.
Because I know I've been guilty of just glancing at it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you really take the time to understand what's going to be discussed in the meeting,
Yeah.
it allows you to start formulating those initial reactions or thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can identify areas where you actually have expertise
Yeah,
and even anticipate those potential discussion points where you might want to contribute.
absolutely. You're not just aware of the topics, but you're already like engaging with them
Right.
ahead of time.
Yeah. And the next step that the article mentions is jotting down some key phrases.
Oh, I love this one.
This is a good one.
Yeah.
So have you ever done this?
I do. I actually keep a little notebook
Oh, wow. Okay.
where I jot down just phrases that I think might be useful for different situations.
So it's like having a mental toolkit ready
Yeah.
for the meeting.
Absolutely. It's like I've got my hammer, my screwdriver, ready to go.
So tell me a little bit more about what kinds of phrases you write down.
So I'll write down things like, different ways to agree with someone. Like, that's a great point. I completely agree. Or
Right.
if I want to offer a different perspective, I'll write down something like, I see what you mean, but I have a slightly different perspective on this.
Oh, that's a good one.
Just things that I can kind of pull out of my hat when I need them.
That's so smart, because what you're doing is you're already preparing for those moments where you might feel a little bit stuck.
Yeah.
Like, how do I phrase this politely, or how do I disagree without, sounding rude?
Exactly. And it's like having those pre-prepared phrases, it's like having those anchors,
Yeah.
Instead of having to like come up with the perfect sentence from scratch in real time, you have these frameworks
Right.
that you can just adapt to the situation.
And it just saves you so much mental energy.
Yeah, it really does. And it boosts your confidence too.
Yeah, because you're not like scrambling in the moment trying to figure out how to say something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so review the agenda, jot down some key phrases, and the last part of preparation that really stood out to me in the article was practicing introducing your points out loud.
Oh,
Have you ever done that?
I have, and it feels a little silly at
It
first,
does feel a little silly.
but it's so helpful.
Like I was reading it and I was like, oh my gosh, am I supposed to stand in front of the mirror
Yeah.
and like practice my talking points?
Yeah, it does feel a little performative, but there's a reason why actors rehearse their lines.
Right.
It's the same kind of concept.
It's like getting comfortable with the sound of your own voice.
Exactly. And it's not just about like the words themselves. It's about like getting used to speaking English in that context, you know?
Totally.
Like you can identify any awkward phrasing or places where you might trip up,
Yeah.
and you can work through them privately.
Right. So by the time you get to the actual meeting, you're like, oh, I've already said this out loud.
Yeah.
Like I know how this feels.
Exactly. And it's going to flow more naturally
Right.
when it matters.
Okay, so preparation isn't just about thinking.
Mhm.
It's about like actively engaging with the material and even practicing like the physical act of speaking.
Uh-huh.
Got it. Okay, so now let's imagine we're in the meeting, we've done our preparation, but we're still feeling a little bit anxious.
Sure.
What do we do?
Oh, yeah, those nerves can still creep up on you.
Totally.
Even when you've prepared.
Totally. So the article suggests starting small.
Oh, I love this advice.
Yeah.
Because it's like it acknowledges the psychological aspect of building confidence, you know?
Mhm.
You're not trying to become this like super confident speaker overnight.
Right.
It's about like creating small manageable experiences that
Yeah.
you can build on.
Yeah, and I think it's something that people forget, is that building confidence takes time.
Yes.
It's not just going to happen overnight.
And it's a process.
It's a process, exactly. So the article gives some great examples of these smaller contributions that you can make in a meeting.
Uh-huh.
Things like just a quick, I agree with that point,
Yeah.
because, or maybe asking a focused question like, could you clarify what you mean by?
Yeah.
Or even just summarizing what's been said so far, like,
Yeah.
so if I understand correctly, we're all on the same page about.
Exactly. And those little contributions, they actually do so much.
Right.
Like they show that you engage, they let you participate without having to give this big, long speech.
Yeah, it's not so intimidating.
Yeah. And each time you do it, it just reinforces that feeling of, okay, I can do this. I can communicate in English.
Right.
It's like a positive feedback loop.
It's like a snowball effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I love that. So it's like those little wins, those successful moments of participation can help you feel more confident when you do have like bigger, more substantial ideas to share.
Exactly. Like you're warming up for the big performance. You start with a few scales.
Those few scales, and then you're ready to tackle the concerto.
Love it. Okay, so start small.
Start small.
Okay, now this next point really resonated with me
Okay.
because I think it's something that I've definitely struggled with in the past. And it's the idea of using clear and simple language.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's this misconception, especially in like professional settings, that you need to use really complex vocabulary to sound smart, right? Like the bigger the words, the better.
Yes.
But honestly, it's the opposite.
It's so true. And this article, like, completely debunks that myth.
It does, and I think it's so refreshing because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, your goal is to be understood.
Exactly.
You want to convey your ideas clearly, and when you use overly complicated language,
You could just get in the way.
it can create confusion, it can make people tune out.
Yeah. And I think it can also make you sound less natural and less approachable.
Yeah, like you're trying too hard. When really you want to sound confident and like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that usually comes across best when you use simple, direct language.
The article gives this really great example.
Okay.
It says, like, let's move forward with this versus let us proceed with the implementation of this initiative.
Oh my God.
Like the second one is just so
It's so convoluted.
convoluted. Yeah, exactly.
Like who talks like that?
No one talks like that.
It's not how humans speak.
It's not how humans speak. And I think that's a good reminder, is that we want to sound like humans.
Yeah.
We want to sound natural and like ourselves.
Exactly.
Not like robots.
It's not like we're reading from a textbook.
Right. And the article also mentions this tip, which I thought was so simple, but so effective. And it's about pausing instead of using filler words like,
Oh, yes. The dreaded filler words.
the dreaded filler words. We all do it.
We all do it.
It's so hard to avoid them. But I've noticed that when I like consciously try to pause, instead of saying, it makes a huge difference.
It does, because those filler words, they can make you sound less confident,
Yeah.
even if you know exactly what you want to say.
Right. It's like they signal that you're unsure.
Yeah, like you're searching for the right word.
Yeah. And a pause, on the other hand, it gives you a moment to collect your thoughts,
Uh-huh.
to breathe, and it just projects this sense of like calm and control.
Yeah, like you're in charge of what you're saying.
Yeah, and it can make your communication sound more deliberate and more impactful.
Totally.
Okay, so ditch the overly elaborate language.
Okay.
Keep it simple and embrace the power of the pause.
The power of the pause. I love that.
All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is this idea of having a mental bank of useful phrases for meetings.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
So have you ever heard of this concept?
I have, and it's something that I actually use all the time.
Okay, so tell me more about it.
So it's basically like having this collection of phrases
Uh-huh.
that you can use in different situations in a meeting.
Right. So it's almost like we talked about jotting down those key phrases
Yeah.
before the meeting, but this is more like having
A mental library.
a mental library of phrases that you can just pull out
Exactly.
whenever you need them.
And it's so helpful because, meetings can be unpredictable.
Right.
You never know exactly what's going to come up.
Do you know what people are going to say?
So having these phrases ready to go, it just makes it so much easier to participate.
Yeah, and it's especially helpful, I think, for people who are learning English.
Oh, absolutely, because it takes some of the pressure off of having to come up with the perfect grammar in the moment.
Yeah, you already have the structure of the sentence,
Exactly.
so you can just focus on the content.
Yeah, and it just makes you sound more fluent and more confident.
Yeah. So what are some examples of phrases that you have in your mental bank?
So for starting a point, I'd like to add something here.
Okay, simple and direct.
Yeah, and it gets people's attention.
Right.
For agreeing, yeah, I'll say something like, that's a great point. I completely agree.
Yeah.
And then for disagreeing, which can be a little trickier,
Yeah.
I'll use something like, I see what you mean, but I have a slightly different perspective.
Ooh. I like that because it's like you're acknowledging the other person's point of view,
Yeah,
but you're also, politely stating your own.
exactly. It's all about being respectful and keeping the conversation flowing.
Right. And then what about if you need to ask for clarification?
Yeah, so I'll usually say something like, could you explain that a bit more? Or, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by, just something that shows that you're actively listening,
Right.
but you need a little bit more information.
And the last one is for summarizing, which is really important at the end of a meeting to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for that, I'll say, so just to recap, we're deciding to,
Okay?
or the key takeaways from this meeting are,
Love it.
just something that brings everything together.
Okay, so building this mental bank of phrases is like a really concrete, practical strategy.
It is, and the best part is you can customize it
Right.
to your own needs.
Yeah, find phrases that feel natural for you.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's talk about something that I think a lot of people struggle with, especially when they're feeling nervous, and that's pacing and breath.
Yeah, I think those two are so connected.
They are. Like when we get nervous, we tend to rush our words.
Yeah.
We speak really fast, and it can make it harder for other people to understand us.
And it can also make you sound less confident.
Right, it's like you're trying to get it over with as quickly as possible.
Exactly. And the article gives some really great advice for how to manage your pacing and breath.
Okay, like what?
So first, take a deep breath before you start speaking.
Okay.
Just that one breath can make a world of difference.
Centering yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And then try to incorporate pauses
Uh-huh.
between your ideas.
Okay.
Like give people a moment to process what you've said.
And give yourself a moment to think.
Exactly. And then emphasize key words
Okay.
so that people really understand the most important parts of your message.
So it's like being really intentional with your speech.
Exactly.
Okay, and the article makes this point that I thought was really interesting, and it's that speaking slower can actually make you sound more confident.
Oh, yeah.
It seems counterintuitive, right?
It does, because when you're nervous, you want to get it out fast.
Right.
But when you slow down, it shows that you're in control.
Right. It's like you're not afraid to take up space.
Yep. Yeah, and it gives your listeners time to really absorb what you're saying.
So next time you're feeling nervous, try to remind yourself to slow down.
Yeah, take a breath
Take a breath.
and pause.
Those little things can make a big difference.
Okay, so pacing and breath check.
Check.
Okay, now, this next point is something that I think is so important for anyone who's learning English or who feels self-conscious about their language skills.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of focusing on understanding over perfection.
Oh my gosh, this is huge.
It is huge because I think so many people get caught up in trying to speak perfect English.
Yeah, like they're afraid of making mistakes.
Right. And it can prevent them from speaking up at all.
Absolutely, because they're so worried about grammar.
Yeah, and the article reminds us that in a professional setting, the most important thing is effective communication.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, your goal is to be understood and
Yeah.
to contribute your ideas.
Not to be a grammar robot. It's
Yeah.
about the content of what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we forget that.
We get so caught up in the mechanics of the language
Mhm.
that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
And your colleagues, they want to hear your ideas.
Right?
They're not sitting there, like, critiquing your grammar.
No, they want to know what you think.
Exactly.
So don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back.
Yeah, and the article also gives some good advice for what to do if you do make a mistake,
Okay.
which we all do.
We all do, even native English speakers.
All the time.
All the time.
So if you make a mistake, just acknowledge it briefly, correct yourself if you need to, and then move on.
Yeah, don't dwell on this.
Don't let it derail you.
Right? Yeah.
Just keep going.
And the more you practice, the easier it will become.
Yeah, practice really does make a difference.
It does.
Like any skill, the
Yeah.
more you do it, the better you get at it.
Okay, so focus on understanding over perfection.
I love that mantra.
Me too.
Mm.
Okay, so the final point that we're going to discuss today is the importance of regular practice.
Oh, yes. This is so key.
It is, because you can read all the articles you want. You can listen to all the podcasts.
Uh-huh.
But if you don't actually practice speaking English in real-life situations, you're not going to see that much improvement.
Right. It's one thing to know the theory,
Yeah,
but you have to apply it
you have to apply it.
in the real world.
So the article suggests a few really practical ways to get that practice.
Okay. Like what?
The first one is role-playing.
Oh, fun.
So you could like ask a colleague or a friend
Uh-huh.
to practice a meeting scenario with you.
Okay.
So you could like come up with a topic
Yeah.
and then, take turns presenting your ideas and asking questions.
And you can practice using those phrases
Exactly.
that we talked about.
And it's a great way to get feedback too.
Yeah, you can ask your partner, like, how did I sound? Did I make sense?
Right.
And they can give you some pointers.
Yeah, and it's a safe space to make mistakes.
Yeah, you're not in front of your boss or your clients.
Exactly.
It's just you and your friend.
So role-playing is a great way to get comfortable with speaking English in a meeting setting.
Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Okay, the second suggestion is recording yourself speaking.
Oh, this one can be a little cringy.
It can be.
And it's so helpful.
It is, because sometimes we don't realize how we sound
Yeah.
until we hear ourselves.
Right, like you might think you're speaking really clearly, but then you listen back and you're like, oh,
It's not what I thought.
I'm mumbling or...
Or I'm speaking way too fast.
Yeah, exactly. So recording yourself can help you identify those areas where you can improve.
Right, and you can focus on things like your pacing, your clarity, and even those filler words that we talked about.
It's like having your own speech coach.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last suggestion is just to seek out opportunities to engage in English conversations as much as possible.
Yeah, like just in everyday life.
Yeah.
Not just in meetings.
Right, so you could like join an English conversation group
Uh-huh.
or find a language partner.
Yeah.
Or even just watch movies or TV shows in English.
Yeah, just immerse yourself in the language.
Right, and the more you expose yourself to English, the more comfortable you'll become.
Yeah, it'll start to feel more natural.
And it'll be less intimidating to speak up in those work meetings.
Totally.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
And I think the key takeaway is that building confidence in speaking English during work meetings is a journey.
It's a journey.
It's not a destination.
I love that.
It takes time, it takes effort,
Uh-huh.
and it takes consistent practice.
But it's so worth it.
It is so worth it, because when you can communicate effectively in English, it opens up so many doors.
Absolutely.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah. Embrace the journey.
Embrace the journey.
And celebrate your progress.
Yes, celebrate those small wins.
Yeah,
And remember that your ideas and your perspectives are valuable,
they are.
no matter what your level of English is.
So true.
So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Think about all of the techniques that we discussed today
Uh-huh.
and choose just one
Okay.
that you can try to implement in your next work meeting.
I love that.
Maybe it's preparing a few key phrases,
Yeah.
or maybe it's consciously speaking a little bit slower. Whatever it is, just choose one thing and commit to doing it
Yeah.
and see how it changes your experience.
I think you'll be surprised at how much of a difference it can make.
I think so too. All right, that's it for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.